Oh, so I guess first of all, introduce yourself, and then, well, basically, I don't know if it's going to be any harder because this is audio only, but I'd like you to talk about pretty much anything and everything that you discussed in that presentation you gave at Chief Golden Light Eagles 11/11 conference. So you got the floor. Your story, your life story, and what you said at that conference presentation.
Okay. Um, I all right. My name's Elliott Haines III, and I've been kept alive because Spirit wanted me to be, including being tapped on the shoulder. When I was alone in the car, 3 taps on the right shoulder to keep me from having a head-on collision because I was looking at the moon shadows on a harvest fifth moon of the month, whatever. And so my meander in my astrological sign is a water sign, Pisces, and someone said 3 or 3.5 of my other houses are also Pisces. So people were saying it's no wonder that I have something to do with water. Um, the hydrologic cycle is something that I remember learning in earth science about evaporation, condensation, and precipitation, and that the 3 arrows connected all 3 of them, and it just went round and round. So it was just recycled. But something with Standing Rock and the Warriors for Mother Earth, and it was talking about the Earth, and there was a strong realization, epiphany, that it's the blue planet, but underneath the blue is the Earth. So the water and the Earth are inextricably linked together. And so it's not just about warriors for Mother Earth, it's warriors for the elements that make up the Earth. And the one blue planet with the minerals in it, that's the key. That's something that I didn't hear in the hydrologic cycle. The hydrologic cycle, H2O, 2 hydrogen, 1 of oxygen, and that's rain. And people would say, well, rain is water, so the T-shirt, water is life, rain is life. Well, rain, water is not life. And the simplistic way that my brain in a fashion worked was that there isn't that which is sustaining for life. What's coming out of the sky is closer to distilled water, and distilled water has the absence of minerals that similar molecules bond together when they're heated and also when they're frozen, I guess, because that's what floaties are in the bottom of a glass when a person has a drink and the ice cubes melt. The calcium, magnesium, those molecules will clump together, and that'll be the floaties in the bottom. So with the heat precipitating out and putting water vapor up into the air to have it condense and then go down into the catch facility, there's no minerals there because they're staying behind in the boiling chamber. Interestingly, just a quick side note, Federal Trade Commission said people couldn't say pure distilled water unless there was post distillation charcoal filtration, because they found after 31 inches off the boiling chamber that molecules of chemicals were still being vaporized and going up and being collected. So that which was condensing and going into the water, which quote unquote should be pure, wasn't because of the chemicals. Now, another thing about water is life, that for the native peoples and for native peoples of all lands, in a sense, had a ring to it of authenticity before knowing about all the things that we do in the past 2, 3, 4, 500 years of the renaissance of knowledge and people getting awareness of planets and science and Newton and all the rest of the great thinkers. But what's the fact is now is there are too many things that impact upon it, and we know that even things that are natural and from nature, uranium is natural, but I don't want to have that natural element in something that I eat. So what I'm aware of is there are things that can enhance what Mother Nature has created, and and remove things that are harmful, such as radon and arsenic 5, two specific ones that are dealing with groundwater and water coming from beneath the surface of the earth, beneath the aquifers. There's decaying rocks, and that's causing the radon, which is, I think I remember reading, it's comparable to secondhand cigarette smoke as far as toxicity is concerned. But back to water is life. The rainwater is not life because it's not, and what's being missed completely is that it's not until it's in contact with the surface of the earth, be it leaves, dirt, plants, streams, rivers, lakes, and then because of the principle of having areas of lesser concentration and greater concentration, nature wants to see about sharing. So if there's a great concentration and something comes in that's similarly structured but doesn't have any, it'll go from the greater concentration to lesser. So the rainwater comes down, it's hungry, it's aggressive, and it wants to get back to the way it was before it was evaporated. Dr. Emoto from Japan, who has shown that the crystals of water, when they have intentionality focused on the water, that the ice crystals change predicated on what intention was being directed towards the molecules, to the fluid. And so that's something that maybe the rainwater realizes, that it isn't viable as it was before it was evaporated. And maybe that's why it is hungry and it wants to see about getting those minerals that are already there in the molecules of water, that are on anything that's been connected to, rooted in the earth. And my epiphany was that the Mother Earth, the Earth Mother, births the electrolytes of life through mineral water. Whatever the process is of water going down, percolating through slowly, meandering, picking up a little bit here. Who knows, say, the consciousness, but it does what it does, and it becomes mineralized. And that's what all 2- and 4-legged have been drinking since the beginning. Mother Nature doesn't make plastic water, doesn't make deionized water, doesn't make distilled water, doesn't make reverse osmosis water. None of those things are true. What is created that makes our planet different and is allowing us to have life, plants as well need minerals, but mammalian life needs to have mineral water the way it was created. Taking a bucket of oyster shells, which is calcium, and grinding it up into dust and dumping it into a container of water, yeah, it might get diluted, but will the molecule pick it up as it would if it was slowly sifting through and filtering through the rock strata that's there beneath the dirt, or picking up minerals from the dirt? And when I started seeing this as being something that was, it was a lack of respect for that one spaceship, that one planet that we're living and riding on, the spaceship mothership, Earth. And with that volume of plastic that's being dumped into the waterways, a tractor trailer filled as a one of them every minute is being dumped into waterways, and the frequency is getting closer to every 30 seconds because of single-use bottles and because of things thrown in because it's trash. It's a despoilation of that which is the most sacred, and for some reason, man collectively may be driven by corporations and or agendas that we could go into later on, but the bottom line is it's said that one doesn't befoul one's own backyard, and here it's almost encouraged to out of sight, out of mind, buried in the ground. My residence and my activities have been in proximity to Fort Detrick in Frederick, Maryland, which is the place where they had not only psych ops but also biological warfare curiosities and what they could do to see about coming up with things. And there was a meeting that I got to in Frederick County, Maryland, about some areas near the Frederick Fort Detrick compound where people had wells and there was apparently some chemicals. Well, it turns out back in the late 40s, early 50s, late 40s, they buried all kinds of chemicals. I don't know, Site B or something, I think it was called. And I happened to hear somebody who was saying that he had started to work at Fort Detrick in the late 40s, early, and somebody had told him at that time that they had never better dig up these chemicals because they were so toxic. And I guess the idea that the chemical containers would, shall we say, disintegrate, they were probably like fuel, fuel oil barrels, barrels of oil, who knows what type of containers, but they weren't put in with any, I guess, idea of longevity. It was, again, out of sight, out of mind. That's what was expressed by that guy, and here it was 50 years later. And then there was all things about Fort Detrick releasing things into the air that people didn't know about. Some of them may have even been done purposely, but who's going to smell or taste or know what's being emitted? But back to the significance of the water, and the ocean has the minerals in it. I think I came across some bit of information that said that if a person went out and was in the ocean for 20 minutes, 2 or 3 times a week, they would get enough trace minerals in that they wouldn't even need the mineralization from their food supply. So that's significant because the minerals are also things that would retain energy and have I say perhaps a vibrational capability of retaining it. I happen to have connections to Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, and they've had a water tasting and a taste of the tap for the past 27 years, thereabouts. And in 1998, a hydrologist with 4 decades with the United States Department, U.S. State Department, said to somebody that he, in his travels around the globe, had found 5 distinct waters in the world, and Berkeley Springs was one of them. And that perked up my ears when I heard the story. I didn't get a chance to meet him firsthand or speak with him, but the native peoples in the area of the panhandle of West Virginia, where Berkeley Springs is located, didn't war in that area of the land because they were grounded. They were barefoot or they wore moccasins, and they were in contact with the Earth Mother. And that vibrational input, that grounding, was getting vibrations up, but it was also getting things to be discharged into the earth. I'm not a scientist, nor do I play one on radio, but the more I'm finding out about that which the body is made up of, and how at one time it was parts per million, and then it was parts per billion, and now it's even known, and the equipment is around, to have parts per trillion, and to know that even at that seemingly infinitesimal level, there can be effects upon the human condition. The people who are multiple chemical sensitive, they have a category that's known as HSP, highly sensitive people, and in Europe, it's thought to be 15 to 20% of the population are HSPs. And that sensitivity, that means that those people, those individuals, are the canaries in the coal mine. And when they stop singing, the canaries are dead. So if it's affecting the canaries and they're not singing as loudly or as, boldly as they were, it's because they're being affected by things. It's like DDT. Here was Rachel Carson, just an observer. And when I remember the book title, Silent Spring, being somewhat and definitely directed by water, I was thinking that the spring, the fluid, was a place that was silent because the chemicals were in the water or being diluted or being contaminated, and animals weren't going around. I happened to see a public broadcasting show, and it turns out she knew, and from her research, that the eggshells of the birds were being affected by the DDT. The shells weren't substantial enough so that there were a lot of birds that were dying because they weren't being hatched out. So it was really about the fact that what would it be the first day of spring if a person went outside and there were no birds singing because they'd all died off because of the exposure to DDT. So I had to, adjust my analogy or my metaphor or my idea of referring to the spring being silent because of the chemicals, that it was the springtime, the season, that was affected. So here was one person who just observed, and, she was vilified. She was trying to get us to be connected to what's going on. We're, in some regards, meant to be lab rats, practically, for the corporatocracy that's out and looks at us as just being lab rats. We've got an innocent until proven guilty overall mindset with things that are going on in the United States collectively. And then if the politicians can be paid off or bought off to see about making laws and rules and regulations that seem to support the corporations, amazingly, it'll take a lot to see about overcoming the fact that there are toxins that are being distributed to us in the faux food industry, as well as into the air and other things that are harmful. But I digress. The point of it is getting back to that nature works. Mother Nature has been doing things for millions of years. A quick tangent, I happened to see a NOVA program, and 66 million years ago was when the dinosaurs died. It was on Nova, and there was a cataclysmic crater, like 128 miles in size, that hit somewhere off the coast north of South America and east of Central America. And when they drilled through all the strata and all the dirt and rock, and they got back to 54 million years, and then all of a sudden they got back to 66 million years ago, and here was this band across, and it showed the fallout that happened. And that was the day that the dinosaurs basically were almost completely wiped out. There were certain things that sort of survived, platypuses and other things, but things have happened, and here's a history of what's going on. And here we have somebody that says, hey, it's all conspiracy about global warming. It's just being done. No, the Brits did a drilling in the ice cap and went down something that was comparable with something like 800,000 years, not the 66 million that this drilling site did in the, Caribbean area or the waters east of Central America and north of Venezuela. But they went down through the glaciers and found out that there's never been such a collection of the molecules in the ice that there has been in the past 250, 300 years, basically, since fossil fuel has been big. So the planet may have been visited, quite likely was visited by some forms that came over, and they may have come for minerals, precious things, and they got the bipeds that were here to be kind of brought into the workforce to see about mining for gold and other things. But there's a possibility that they may have come here for the H2O as well, but certainly it's the respect that we have now and knowledge that we have now that, 2/3 of the earth is considered blue, covered with water. I think it was National Geographic that said that of that 97 or 98% was salt water, and only really 2% was fresh. And the fresh water, of course, is what we need to stay alive, to drink. Desalinization and having plants desalinize the water is going to make that which goes into the oceans more acidic. And so desalinization can see about being a great financial means of creating jobs and creating profits for things. Speaking of that, and here's the quick tangent, I'm speaking with a unique mind that's been, shall we say, customized. The point of it is there was a nuclear plant that was made by somebody who brought to you, I think, it might have been even Ronnie Reagan, but it was General Electric, and their motto was, "We bring good things to life." Well, they were the ones that made the Fukushima plant in 1971 on the coast of Japan, and it just happened to be on a fault line, and they had 4 or 6 reactors, and they probably charged a price to the Tokyo Electric plant to see about building it to withstand everything that could be possibly known. They probably charged them for that. Now, I'm just saying this is obviously speculation on my part because I don't know. But they built it to withstand an earthquake, but they didn't build it to withstand the tsunami that followed after March of 2011 when the earthquake struck. The tsunami wiped out the things that weren't hurt by the earthquake, and that's why that plant will never be really remediated. We don't talk about it because it's quite possibly going to have a Saturday Night Live skit to say, we bring good things to an end because we didn't build Fukushima to withstand the tsunami. And that's unbridled nuclear fission that's going through. And there was something in the news in the past 6 months that they put 8 cameras in, and 7 of the 8 cameras were knocked out because of the intensity of the radioactivity within the first 6 or 7 minutes. One of them kept on going, and it got to a cooling pool that found a 3 meter by 3 meter, 9 or 10 by 10 opening at the bottom where apparently the radioactivity had gone through, and who knows, maybe burrowing through to eventually get down to the inner core of the globe as we know it. What that's going to do, who knows? This is a scenario that's never been experienced before. But the bottom line is the radioactivity that's still going into the atmosphere as well as into the oceans. One estimate was it was 300,000 to 400,000 metric tons of radioactive water that's going into the Pacific every day and has been since March of 2011. These are the things that are being done to the earth, not for the earth, and certainly not for mankind. It may have been driven by profits, but man, in some regards, should be more sacred and valuable than profits. I believe in people over profits. That tangent back to Hiroshima. Here it is, Japan again. Two things to do with radioactivity. One very quick and cataclysmic, ×2 for Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And here's Fukushima. That wasn't, well, I was going to say, the quote in this story was that the United States was a Christian country, and, that they were concerned about people. And then for them to be the only country that's ever unleashed an atomic bomb on the citizens is unforgivable. And by the same tangent, and as my mind is working here, here's another company that may have origins in the United States, in General Electric, and they don't have something that's as cataclysmic and huge devastation in split seconds as Nagasaki and Hiroshima, but here's something that could be ad infinitum of radioactivity going on because of not building the plant to withstand the tsunami that happened to happen after the earthquake happened on the coastline, where there was a fault line and there was going to be earthquakes quite possibly on a fault line. And they have some recollection that there's a connection between earthquakes and tsunamis. So it may have been there in the idea, and we'll charge them for it, but we're not going to actually do it because, whoops, we forgot, what was an oversight, whatever. We bring good things to their life back in the 50s, 60s, and then because of what's happened, we may be very well bringing good things to a slow, long-lasting deterioration into, wait a second, we got 7 seas, so there's firewalls between the 7 seas, so all that radioactivity going into the Pacific and everything like that will be contained. And no, wait a second. Oh, yeah, that is one ocean that's got 7 separate names to it, but it's all connected. And how it gets stirred around, certainly in the atmosphere, they know that the stuff is going up and it's being distributed around the globe. The NOVA program is something that I would strongly recommend seeing because it captures 60 plus million years of information that's beneath the surface in this crater where this asteroid hit. I guess it's an asteroid. So my simplistic thing is that respecting the earth, honoring the earth mother, why they didn't include it in the hydrologic cycle, that it's not until the raindrops get the minerals, then the mineral water equals life. And that's the truth empirically, wherever a person is, given what's been created by nature to sustain life of plants, animals, and plants. The mineralization is the crucial thing that's needed to see about having life as we know it. And I spoke at Laguna Beach for Star Knowledge, and I made mention of Sherwin, who was Chief Golden Light Eagle's youngest brother, who passed away earlier this year. And in a presentation that he that was recorded, he was talking about tears, and I don't know if I'm putting it in, but there was like it was irrigation of the heart, and the tears are there. Later on, past actually since November 20th or thereabouts, I spoke with somebody who's a naturopath, and he says, well, tears come in two forms. There's tears of irritation, and then there's tears of emotion. And that all of a sudden sprang out at me, and I'm going, tears of emotion are what irrigate the heart. Tears of irritation are distinctive. It's trying to have cleansing of the sensitive tissue of the eyeball and the eye area. And cortisol is apparently something that is released through tears. No other form of removal from the body happens with cortisol. Maybe that's misstated. The gist of it is cortisol is the only thing. Tears have cortisol, and that's one thing that no other body fluid has. So it's a way of getting rid of cortisol. So it's therapeutic for people to cry, male or female. But tears are collectively, generally, kind of looked at as being, oh, weak, you're crying, There is no crying in baseball, from Tom Hanks with League of Their Own. Well, if there's tears of emotion, and certainly baseball is a game that can create emotion for the fans as well as the players. Look at the people in Houston and how jubilant they were to have their city devastated by the hurricane. And then, of all things, they handily took care of the Dodgers, and seemingly the amount of dollars that were invested in the Dodger team compared to the Houston team, but it wasn't that which held sway. It was the emotions that were there, the baseball prowess certainly, but there were tears of joy and happiness for the people in Houston, as well as the players and all their fans, and all baseball fans, just because they appreciate the game. So the tears of emotion were there, and that is something that is key. The emotions that I feel, and because my mission is to honor the Earth Mother, the sacred Mother Earth, and have the respect for that which she is 24/7, all receiving and all giving, because all life as we know it is predicated upon her. Yeah, there's Father Sky and the Heavenly Father, but that fact of the rain, 2 hydrogen, 1 of oxygen, without minerals in it, that's not there completely. It's like the yin-yang logo, the circle with the black and white with the teardrops kind of, mixed together, one's black, one's white, yin-yang symbol. We are the two together, male and female, water and earth, that work together, inextricably linked. And that's what needs to be. It's not just man being dominant over Mother Nature, and whether or not that's a deep-seated misogynistic term or phrase or thought, but females, back when the country USA, they were only, were they 3/5, or was it the slaves that were only 3/5? The gist of it was females in the United States didn't get a chance to vote until like 1921, the suffragettes. But the earth energy is feminine. Male and female both have both, I think, hormones in them. Obviously, depending, there's more estrogen in females and there's more androgen in males. But there's some in both. And whether or not, this is another quick tangent, but why is it that in the hydrologic cycle, that factor of the mineralization coming from the earth mother, birthing it, isn't present? Is it because the feminine energy is looked at as being second hand? It doesn't have the same validity as the male energy. Father Sky gives the water to the earth in the form of rain. Quick thing on that too, there are certain corporations that have had patents on cloud seeding and dealing with manipulating the weather. Geoengineering is apparently the phrase these days. But if they can make it rain, then there'd be somebody who would also say, well, if we could make it rain, maybe we can make it not rain. Well, that allows for then people to have, if they're driven by the little God prophets and the little God prophets in my unique brain, it's the greed of demon prophets. So if they can manipulate the weather to make it rain, and then at the same time they can manipulate it so it doesn't rain, that means they could perhaps have influence over the crops. And if a person has influence over the crops, they can make things happen that will make for a lot of crops, and then they could also make a scarcity. And dealing with economics, if there's a scarcity, the cost of the commodity or the item goes up. So for 60, 70, 75 years, there's been means of making a difference for the amount of rainfall that comes into the United States. And a person named Dane Wigington, Wigington, has a NASA or a NOAA map that shows a cloud formation that looks like a postage stamp off the northern coast of California, westerly, the northern part of California, the westerly area of that, and it formulates, and then it slowly drifts across into Northern California. Well, it turns out that was created by the chemtrails that were put up. And a California Department of Agricultural person at the UN back in, I think it was February of 15 or 16, is on record to say that they're even detecting the chemicals in the stream water of Northern California. And it was stated succinctly by her, I can't remember the name, but she said the chemtrails, the chemicals, are starting to impact the groundwater and in the waterways. Well, we know that they're putting up strontium and aluminum particles, and something came out that they're using alumina because it's to mess up the enemy's radar. And then something else was that they were putting in thorazine. And somebody maybe facetiously said, well, it's good for the people who are bipolar. So thorazine, of course, was the psychotropic drug that was big in the 60s and 70s and probably was part of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest with Jack Nicholson. Jack Nichols. Nicholas is the golfer. Jack. Here's Johnny. That Jack is the actor. I'm getting to the point where I'm actually going to need to have a bit of hydration because I need to wet my whistle.
No problem. I have no intention of interrupting you. This is some pretty unique stuff you're talking about here. Some of it has nothing to do with water, but it's still interesting. So, yes. So,
Well,
you want to drink, go ahead. If there's anything else you want to say, go ahead. I got my list of notes here to jot down anything I think needs elaboration, and I got a couple things down. So continue.
Okay, I'm getting right to it right now, and I will take a hit, and I'm walking out because of hooray for the cordless phone. Mm. Mm. Thank you. Thank you, Mother Nature, for providing me with the mineral water of life and for having that break here, Andrew. Um, so, no, a person at Star Knowledge walking the opposite direction from me, and when she was within 4 feet, she said, "You need to write a book." As she walked by, she didn't look at me or anything. She just said it purposely, as though at that point it was downloaded to her to tell me that. And this, that I am, obviously not following part one, part two, these are the tangents that, are being governed by spirit, uh, by some connections that I see a connection to, and that stream of consciousness is what's kept me alive, literally and figuratively, because my specific situation is that I don't have stereoscopic vision. I don't see like other people, and it's more unique because of the brain injury that probably prompted the visual deficiency. But what I realized just earlier this year, and it was with somebody who's haptic brained, and she was speaking with two other females, women who are quite gifted, and I realized that what they had with a double X chromosome um, was something that allowed them to have one, twice as much immune fighting capabilities because the X chromosome has the immune system on it. And so that's one reason why males have a greater, shall we say, frequency of autism and ADDH and other things, because they don't have the same immune fighting capabilities, half as much, technically speaking. So that's why there's a 8-to-1 ratio of males to females practically with having these learning difficulties. And they also know that there's a connection to the additives that are in foods. We've been subjected to a faux food industry for the past who knows how many decades. It's been for Betty Crocker, who wasn't a real person, I don't believe, but she made things that were capable of being created by mom in the kitchen back in the 50s, convenience in a box, and TV dinners, and all of these things were the idea that there's still supposedly the Twinkie or the Snowball. I can't remember if it's a Twinkie or the Snowball, but the gist of it is it's 35 years later, and it still hasn't started to grow mold yet because it's been so industrialized in its components that it's faux food. It looks like food-like material. And an anecdote from the first Gulf War, when there were fatalities by the enemies, their bodies started decomposing more quickly. The U.S. military fatalities didn't. And what was put together was there had been so much BHT and things that were preservatives for the food that had been ingested by the soldiers that their bodies were already, shall we say, pre-treated with formaldehyde-like chemicals to preserve their bodies. That was back 7, 8 years ago, and yet we're still, monosodium glutamate, the excitotoxin, Chinese food syndrome. It's a $3 billion a year industry for the Ahinto company to see about making MSG, and that MSG is so phenomenal. It's a way of amplifying the nerve impulse between the nerves, dendrites, and I can't remember what the other parts is, but as they go across the space in between, it's like an amplifier, so it makes it real loud. That, oh, that's great tasting food. And then, like, for people who are sensitive, 3 to 4 hours later, they feel like they're running out of washcloth because it's kind of like the letdown after the excited toxins have kind of done their thing. But they did it to the lab rat animals, and they kept pressing the button and pressing the button. And they finally did the autopsies that many of the animals had, basically holes in their brain from the excitotoxin. And there's like 37 different ways to say MSG without saying MSG. So, no MSG. But it could be one of the other 36 ways of saying it that has the chemicals in it. So these are the things that are going on, that are being done to people. That's why, gosh, organic food and people being concerned about what they ingest. What's this thing about teaching females that their body is a temple? Well, everybody's body is a temple, and what goes into it is vitally important to respect the temple if a person considers that a temple is a place of worship, and i.e., I think it's in the biblical area that somebody went into the temple and threw out the money changers. So it was the defilement. What? This is a whole admixture of things, but the people individually have to be brought up in their levels of consciousness about the miracle of the hydroelectric machine that everyone is, and all mammalian cell creatures. A quick thing. The National Cancer Institute is a publicly supported government agency that gets, taxpayer dollars to make it function. And it's located in Fort Detrick, Maryland. Well, I've been a NPR radio fan for a long time, and my partner at the time got up at 6 o'clock in the morning before she went to the doctor's office where she was a nurse. And so I heard this story at 6 o'clock in the morning and 6:30 in the morning, and I didn't hear it 7:30, 8. I didn't hear it for the rest of the day. Didn't hear it again until 2 weeks later, when I happened to be in the Brunswick Middletown area of Frederick County, and it was noon, and Paul Harvey, the famous radio voice of news, who had a tagline that says, "And that's the rest of the story." Well, he was talking about the National Cancer Institute and the thing about chlorine and cancer. So, as I even kind of physiologically now, if I was on, I perked up. And I'm going, wait a second, Fort Detrick's less than 20 miles from where I am. I drove into Fort Detrick, got on base, went to the library, got the Journal of National Cancer Institute, in case a person wants to write it down, Journal of NCI, June 18th, 1997, page 848 to 856. So I'm happily reading there in the library, and on the synopsis page at the very beginning, about halfway down, it had real dense writing, because the top part had, it turns out it was basically research that had been done in Finland. So there were names that had different configurations of the letters because of the circle with a line through it, or a asterisk, or whatever, and however it's pronounced. But all these names in multiple syllable scientific terms. But the basic thing was the carcinogenicity of chlorinated drinking water. But a fourth grader could have understood that, so they put it in language that was more obfuscated. But there at the top, in the middle of the thing, as it went from the bottom third half column, and then it went over to the next column, at the very top it said, quote, potent mammalian cell carcinogens. Well, those potent mammalian cell carcinogens were the chlorine compounds known as DBPs, disinfectant byproducts, that were the potent mammalian cell carcinogens. And further on in the article, these DBPs were, quote, contributing to or directly causing stomach cancer, bladder cancer, colon cancer, kidney, liver, thyroid, pituitary, lung, and leukemia. Now, that's just a way I put together those 9 cancers so that it would be somewhat easier for me to memorize. But those 9 cancers are the most frequent of, say, 15 cancers in North America. But they are the most frequent for anywhere in the globe where they use chlorine as the treatment to disinfect the water to kill microbes so that people don't get diarrhea, typhoid, whatever, all the things that are there for waterborne illnesses. If it's killed and then boiled, that will take care of the things that are harmful. Well, they've known for decades about the chlorine cancer-causing byproducts of the chlorination process when water with organic material mixes with chlorine. These separate chlorine compounds, trihalogenated methanes, but these DBP compounds are the potent mammalian cell carcinogens, and those things are in every beverage that's produced in North America that uses municipal tap fluids that have been treated to the health department standards with chlorine, which is practically everything. Because the municipality pre-treats the water, that means the bottling place doesn't have to. It's already met the health department guidelines. Then it goes into the place that's putting together the beverage. They'll put it through a taste and odor filter. That filter will reduce the smell and the taste of the chlorinated swimming pool and do squat and diddly to reduce, certainly not remove. It will do nothing to reduce the potent carcinogens of the chlorine process. And when that was published 20 years ago in 5 months or 6 months now, it was not available on the internet unless a person subscribed to the Journal of National Cancer Institute, which at that time was $350 a year. And if they did so, they would get a password so that they could go online, would put the password in, and then they could read the June 18th, 97 publication, Journal of NCI, and see page 848 to 856, and find out all the information of these people in a foreign land who had done a study between 94 and 96. They had male and female subjects, probably Westar rats that are, as somebody said facetiously, they're bred to get cancer. Well, yeah, they're lab rats. So if they're going to be subjected to carcinogens, they're bred to get cancer. Oh, chuckle, chuckle. So, but it isn't like they're skewing them that they're already predisposed to get cancer. It's just they're born to become animals, and we can subject animals because they're just animals. Wait a minute. We're just animals also. So the respect for life, I think, needs to be, we won't go into that. The point of it is, I think all life is sacred. And I think the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki have a greater appreciation for what was snuffed out in a split second because of the atomic bomb that was dropped on them to supposedly save all the lives later on and end the war. That's a quick aside. So, I think I just detrained my rail of thought.
You're talking about how all animals are equal, and would I be correct in assuming you're a vegan?
I am more in that direction. Yes, I have a 5'6", 270-pound medical doctor while I was in the service diagnosed me as having, I had indigestion. So he said, have an upper GI. So I had an upper GI. I was a medic in the service and went to the and at Camp Pendleton Hospital. So I had an upper GI and went back for the results. And a little thing on the side was that I saw an X-ray up, and I asked the corpsman, "Whose X-ray is that?" And he said, "Well, that's yours." And I said, "Well, look at that spine. That spine's got a slight scoliosis to it." He said, "We're not looking at that. We're looking at the GI, the gastrointestinal." So there I go again. Who knew? I was just thinking it might be kind of interesting in case the person didn't know that they had scoliosis. But I do, apparently, because of the X-ray. Anyhow, the doctor wasn't looking at that, and the corpsman wasn't either. But when I got back to the doctor, he said, "You've got acid reflux. Here's my Lancet. Take it 8 times a day." He didn't say that. He said take it before and after every meal, and when you get up in the morning and when you go to bed at night. That would have been 8 times a day with those little bottles of the chalky stuff, and he gave me a case of it. I put it in my locker, and I was going down to the chow hall. A voice talked, to say it was a guide, a spirit, a force that basically said, "Hey, it seems like it happens when you eat meat. You're in California. They grow vegetables all year round. It seems like it starts with meat. Why not eliminate meat and become a vegetarian?" So I did, November of 1976. And I didn't have acid reflux. Now, here's something that is a tacit thing to put into overall. In 1997, the Journal of NCI came in. In the end of 97, I came across a book, or maybe it was the very beginning of 98, and it was Dr. Batman Jalaji's book titled "Your Body's Many Cries for Water," with a subtitle, "Don't Medicate Your Body's Signs of Thirst." Well, I got the book on a Friday, and I started reading it. And 48 hours later, at 7:15 on a Sunday evening, I finished the book. And there was a toll-free number in the back. Now, this was February of 98, and back in that time, there weren't call centers around the globe where people are exploited because they can pay them less money, make more profits, and having 24/7 service. There were only answering machines back in March of 98. So I'm thinking I'll leave my name and number because I want to get more information about this. This person has gifted all of humanity with information that makes a life-changing, life-saving difference. So I dialed the number at about 7:20, and to my surprise, a voice, female with a foreign accent, answered the phone. And I was stunned, but I expressed that I just finished the book, and I was so anxious. I wanted to see about leaving my name and number to get more information about this. And and the person paused and said, "Would you like to speak with the master?" Now, there had been no discussion about Master Billy, who's 9 years old, or Master Slaves, or they didn't have Dungeons and Dragons, I don't think, back then, or there were Masters or whatever, Masters of the Universe or something like that. There had been no term master used in the information that had just been expressed by me and or by her until she asked me that. And I said, "Yes, please." And the gist of it is, she said, "Wait a minute." And I don't remember succinctly if she said distinctly whether or not she said, "I'll get my husband," or "I'll get him," but her husband was the author of the book. So within 15 minutes of finishing the book, Spirit guides, my guide, wanted, because of my Pisces with 3 or 4 houses in Pisces as well, wanted me to speak with the person who had this brilliant light bulb go on. He was in a jail when the Shah was overthrown in 79. He was the only doctor. The jail didn't have a doctor. He was a doctor who had been trained in England Trinity College. I think I remember reading, but the gist of it is he had Western medicine training in England, and there had been somebody who had been a prisoner who was delirious with pain with either a peptic ulcer, some type of ulcer, and he was in a fetal position 14 or 18 hours, delirious. Dr. Batman, as he's affectionately called, he's since passed, gave him 2 glasses of water. It might have been 3. But the point of it is, he gave him because he saw the person in pain and he didn't have any medications. He gave him 2 glasses or 3 glasses of water. He gave him mineral water because they don't use chlorine over in Iran. They just get the water out of the ground and they give it to people. So it was mineral water, but that's not was being point. It was water. It had minerals in it, but it was fluid. He gave it to the person. Within 20 minutes, the person was standing up, speaking lucidly after being delirious and incoherent for over 12 hours. That was the light bulb that went on for Dr. Batman. His medication was water. He gave the person what we know, because of what's just been expressed, is what I'm saying, and that's what he didn't really pick up on because he didn't know about the chlorine and the cancer-causing abilities of chlorinated water. But he gave water, and the water, the implication was it was mineral water. He gave the mineral water to the person, and the guy was cured. The pain had gone away, and he was talking. Well, it turns out when Dr. Batman's book was published in the late 80s, 88, 89, 90, thereabouts, the National Institutes of Health and the American Medical Association would not comment word one on the book that this man had written, Your Body's Many Cries for Water. Well, wait a second. Oh, wait a second. This country has a health care plan. But wait a second. If we really look at it and what was being demonstrated back then, if Your Body's Many Cries for Water was known by people and read and gave them the insight that their peptic ulcer might go away by not taking Mylanta, Pepto-Bismol, or 2/3 approximately of all the medications over the counter are for digestive problems. These were some of the things that were coming out in this book. We have a managed sick care industry in this country because, in part, the insurance industry, which at one time I was licensed to deal with insurance because a man shared with me the rule of 72 and how money works back in 1991. I had shared with him about the importance of healthy water. He had a restaurant. He shared with me the rule of 72 and how money works, and I became licensed to deal with teaching people the rule of 72 and sharing it with small businesses and families, because every family is a small business. So for 5 years, I did the opportunity meeting, and it was the financial wall with 95% feeding into the wall, which banks, savings, loans, insurance companies, all kinds of things that deal with money, and then 5% feeding off the wall because they had their money working for them. So that was the wall that separated the 95 from the 5%. 95 fed into the wall, 95% fed off of the wall. It's now, in the past 27 years, 6 years more, it's now more like 97% feed into the wall, 98%, and 1% to 2% are feeding off the wall. There's never been a transfer of wealth as there has been in the past 30 years, and it's accelerated a whole lot more, and thankfully, one person with integrity, Bernie Sanders, was pointing it out. But, hey, we know how certain things run, and obviously, let's try to get him out of the way as much as possible, because certain people have the right to ascend to break the glass ceiling. I digress. The point of it is the insurance industry at that time was a $20 trillion global force. It is now over $60+ trillion just for that one industry. That's not the other things that are feeding into it. That's just the insurance industry. And a predication on this is insurance was basically Lloyd's of London back in the 1600s, whenever Lloyd's was created. I'm not sure, but the gist of it was a term of insurance to cover from point A, the United Kingdom, to point B, anywhere in the globe where the English colonies were. And oh yeah, what's that famous saying from back then? The sun never sets on the English colonies, because there's always a colony somewhere around the globe. So if point A to point B was the transit, that was the term of the insurance. If the goods got there to point B, Lloyd's kept the money. If the goods didn't get there, Lloyd's paid. But that's the beginnings. All insurance is term insurance. Everything else from the original, oh, wait a minute, we're talking about the original water from Mother Earth. So maybe I can just put a tangent there between original insurance was from point A to point B, a term of time. The original water that was created by Mother Earth is the mineral water, the electrolytes of life. But other things have come into play here. What's come into play is the rule of 72 was something that the banks came up with in the 1820s. And at that time, when loan was made and money was, interest was charged, it was 1%. It was real low, and it was 1% per annum. So that meant on $100 at 1% after a year's time, that $100 would be $101. Well, if a person looked at it that way, it would take 100 years for that $100 to become $200, because it would be $1 a year added to that $100 each time, because it was 1% per annum. Somebody figured out if they took the original $100 and then after the first year they put the $1 in it, and then they did the 1%, that, oh, wait a second, that interest applied to what's being the overall amount. Basically, instead of taking 100 years at $1 a year to make $200, it would double in 72 years, approximately. So right now, with other things being considered, the rule of 72 is what governs money around the globe, and has been doing so since the 1820s. I passed third or fourth grade math, and that's what this rule is about. Third and fourth grade math. They haven't really taught it in schools because it was taken over by the banking industry, because they were making a lot of money with it. And then the insurance industry in the 1840s, late 30s, saw how much money the banks were making, and they said, rats are frats. We can't get in the banking business. We're selling term insurance. It's real cheap. How can we get more money out of these people so we can get those Rule 72 working for us? At the time, back in 91, the insurance industry owned about 2/3 of all commercial real estate in the globe. Now it's probably closer to 75 or 80%. So that's one reason why they're a $60+ trillion force. So when they started bundling a savings, cash value life insurance, you can borrow it, get a cheap loan. Well, so they started selling it with 3 features, but basically a person could only get one at a time, or there were always things written into it. People may have remembered seeing the movie Braveheart with the Australian guy. Yeah, Mel Gibson. Thank you. Yeah, and he was Wallace, and Wallace was the Braveheart, and he was to see about leading the Scots people, and He wanted to be free. And apparently he married his girlfriend, and there was a scene in the movie where the king had his son, the prince, captured Wallace's, what they thought was his girlfriend, but was his wife, and she was tied to a stake, standing up. And then the prince, the king's son, said a few words, and he drew out his dagger. And the next scene was between the feet of the female who was tied to the stake standing up. One could see blood that was dripping down and collecting. So apparently the prince slit her throat to show Wallace their power. When I saw the blood of the person falling on the ground, my mind saw immediately the contracts that had been signed by people by having signed life insurance policies with all the big name companies. They had literally slit their own throats by signing the contract that allowed their life force, their money, to bleed away and go into the insurance industry's pockets. And a person who was instrumental in this that I had found out about, I can't, obviously after the movie, before the movie. No, the movie came out after. But when I saw it, the person who started this was Art Williams, A.L. Williams, who was a marketing company. And what he was showing people was buy term and invest the difference. And that was mathematically superior. He found out about it in the sometime in the 70s. He was a bald-headed football coach from Georgia, and his father had died, leaving 2 or 3 sons and a widow. And when the insurance agent came by to deliver the policy to Mrs. Williams, it was something like $15,000 or $20,000. If it had been term insurance, it would have been $150,000 back in 1962 or 63, which was probably like $1 million today. That's how much difference it would have been if Art Williams' father had had term insurance instead of a cash value life insurance policy. That's when I found out, or when I had shaken the hand of this man, who I still know today and is a dear friend. I knew he was telling me the truth. I knew I had just been imparted knowledge that most people haven't been told, and they needed to find out about it. That same intensity about what I found about how money works and how the Rule of 72 has been purposely kept from people because they don't want people to know about the compounding of interest and how the compounding of debt works the same way. I did the opportunity meeting for 5 years, and I had basically, figuratively speaking, white knuckles on the sword to slay the bastards that were having people's life forces bled away into the life insurance pockets, not giving people the appropriate coverage for what they needed. A person has, and the term was, theory of decreasing responsibility. When they're young, they get married, they have high responsibilities, they may have a home, and they have low amounts of money. Over time, they want to reverse that. So as the responsibilities decrease because the kids grow up, the mortgage gets paid down, a person wants to get out of the high responsibilities and have a high amount of money at the end of it. Kennedy's, Rockefellers, and those names, they don't have to have insurance. They're self-insured. It was so simple and so profound that I understood it. So I was asked to do the opportunity, and basically, I made a difference. And it wasn't until, and here's a specific, my parents had gotten a policy for me from Lutheran Brotherhood. Well, golly, that means, oh, wait a minute, Luther, he was the guy who, 1516, it was just last year, 500 years ago. Oh, yeah, that was also, and that was another thing, the German purity law. But the bottom line is, yeah, or maybe it's this year, maybe it was 1517. Maybe I'm confusing the beer for 1516 and Luther's proclamation on the church door as the proclamation of Reformation. But it was Martin Luther who stood up to the Pope with all these things dictated. So 500 years later, here's the Lutherans talking about a T-shirt, and they were going to see about putting it out. Well, here was the situation that resonated with me, and I wanted people to know the truth about how their money worked, and to see about getting them to see that Lutheran Brotherhood had preyed upon my parents and sold them a cash value life insurance policy on my life when I was born, which was them preying, preying upon my parents. And I mentioned that to somebody's daughter who I had been referred to, and she said, well, that's not very nice, because she understood that I was making a play on words, but it was a play on words that had application. It was meaning that she and her parents had been taken advantage of by the Lutheran Brotherhood, cloaking themselves in the fraternity of the church. Oh, yeah, there's also Woodmen of the World and the Beavers and all these other things that are selling stuff because they try to go for the fraternity of man and teaching them and helping them protected, blah, blah, blah. All insurance is term insurance, 6 months or a year for the car, 6 months or a year for the house, 6 months or a year or monthly for the health insurance. And then when it came to life insurance, let's make it whole life insurance to age 100. And so if a person lives to that time, there were some contracts that would give them their money back after they reached age 100, or maybe 90 or 95. So there was a real goal for them to keep the policy in force as long as possible. The company was taking 1 or 2% to buy the term insurance through a reinsurer, and then they would take 1 or 2% to see about having their business expenses for their offices and pay their secretaries and pay the publications for all the written material they put out. And the rest of the 94, 95% went into their pocket. And that's how they owned 2/3 of all commercial real estate by the 1990s. That was something that I was led to find out about. And it was driven by water, because I wanted to share. A person who had a restaurant needed to have the healthiest water possible. And what I found was something that was valuable, and then the universe said, hey, you've got something valuable there. Here's something that's going to be valuable for everybody who wants to find out how money works, because children and paychecks don't come with a list of instructions. And so imparting knowledge to people would allow them to make informed decisions. My point of saying what I'm saying now, as well as what I was saying then, is I've got the iceberg. I only had X number of minutes in Laguna Beach, and I was governed by bringing in Sherwin's name and about the irrigation of the heart with the tears of emotion that I now know is what I was experiencing. And with perhaps his spirit in mind, I realized in California that less was more. And with tears in my eyes, I ended my presentation, because there was more, but at the same time, I'm not exactly sure yet what I said there, because I know that spirit was talking through me. And so I'm going to have to get a recording and see the videotape. I know I was emotionally drained. Jim Wenzel, who I've known since I was fortunate enough to meet the family that I've always been looking for, the Star Knowledge people, many of them, most of them, are light workers, or have an appreciation for light workers. And it's not the idea of they're like Bud Light. They're a lighter beer than the regular beer. The light workers are trying to illuminate and trying to show the facts of what's there, and not have things shrouded in darkness, and not have things be illusionary. I remember seeing on television David Copperfield making the Statue of Liberty disappear on live television. Duh! And what I now know is that's where the shadow is, and the shadow is that which lurks. And Father Time, yes, but then the Grim Reaper, you can't see his face because it's shrouded. It's got a cloak over the head. So things in shadow are often not positive for living creatures. The shadow was what they used to see about making the Statue of Liberty disappear. Obviously, it's still there. And then I found out that things in the fine print are the attorneys making things shrouded, all this verbiage, so that people can't find out what's in the contract they signed. Wallace's wife, her blood dripping between her feet, her blood was dripping away. She was going to die because she would bleed out. People bleed out with their money going into the insurance company's pockets. I saw it as a one-to-one analogy. And I have a feeling that I possibly was the only one who saw that movie and may have had that connection. And for that, I'm thankful, but that's also an honor to my father and my grandfather and the lineage, the shoulders of my ancestors upon whom I stand now. I know that my point of putting the information out to those people who have ears of and on their heart will hear what is being expressed. The Earth Mother births the mineral waters, the electrolytes of life for all living animals and plants. And when we don't respect that which is created by the Earth Mother, or make what she creates enhanced by having that which can do so with certification, one is going to be abusively used and abused by the ones that are shrouded in words, verbiage, or shrouded by making the Statue of Liberty disappear and make, oh, how did he do that? Well, smoke and mirrors is a big thing. The bottom line is things that people can't smell and taste are what's harmful. The chlorine DBPs are the potent mammalian cell carcinogens. Mineral water without the radon or the arsenic 5 is the healthiest thing for plants and mammalian animals. And that's where people have to have this realization, and they have to be empowered to do what's right for themselves and their loved ones, 2- and 4-legged. And I'll say that because it was 1997 that I found the Journal of National Cancer Institute and read the article. It was published by Cambridge University. I, erudite person that I am, knew that Cambridge was in England. So I contacted Cambridge University in England to find out about this publication. And after being experiencing a $10 or $15 phone call, because this was back in 97 and they didn't have things as they are now, I found out the person at the other end said, oh, our publishing is located at Triangle Park in North Carolina. And with my brain injury, I'm going, Cambridge University has their publishing in North Carolina? The Triangle of North Triangle, whatever, Triangle Park in North Carolina, less than 500 miles away. And here I am calling across the pond to Great Britain. Okay, well, hey, I didn't say I was the brightest bulb in the pack. It just was kind of like, whoa, the universe has a wry sense of humor. I wanted me to contribute to AT&T for the phone bill. So I get a copy. I know we're, I don't know. A friend of mine has a copy of it. I think I have to get it from him now. I don't know where. I've moved too many times. But there it was. The Journal of National Cancer Institute, hard copy, the same one that I'd read at the library. And that pointed out that water that had chlorine in it was contributing or directly causing to those 9 cancers. Then I found out about Dr. Batman's book, and in it, he pointed out and had studied in his research after he was released from the jail that the chromosomes with chronic dehydration will change and cause a breach in the strands. And therefore, at that point, it's a possibility that cancer could be hereditary. But the underlying cause of the breach in the DNA was because of dehydration. This is how profound it was, and why the AMA and National Institutes of Health did not want to have anything to do with this contrarian from Iran, Shah of Iran. Yeah, that's where Dr. Batman was practicing medicine. They threw him in jail. And then he gets this brilliant idea with the light bulb going off, because the universe said, hey, would you like to have an experiment right here while you're in jail? He stayed in longer so that he could do giving people water to see about remediating him. When they offered him to get out, he continued to stay there for X number of months longer, because he was doing medical research by giving people H2O. And the H2O over there was mineral water. That's how much he knew he was onto something. And that's why it was such a threat to the institutions of the standard operating procedures of having the AMA and the National Institutes of Health be kind of controlled by the corporations that have vested interest in having rubber stamps. Quick tangent. Water Quality Association, WQA, Water Quality Association. They have a platinum seal and they have a gold seal. Who knows? Maybe they'll even have a titanium seal later on. But both of those seals that they issue for products, so that they can say a Water Quality Association gold seal product, or a Water Quality Association platinum product, is based upon how much the narrows, shekels, money, how many dollar signs get put into the Water Quality Association's operating budget, and then they'll issue the gold or the platinum seal. So it's kind of the thing about need to pay to play in order to get the seals that look good on the products that people are being sold through advertisement. And before I knew better, I thought advertisement, and vert might have been like veritas, but I was confusing the Latin. I thought it was through truth. Boy, was I wrong. It wasn't through truth at all. It's through misleading and getting people to be like Pavlov's dogs, where they heard the bell and they started salivating, and they got food, and pretty soon they would just ring the bell and they would salivate, and even if there wasn't food. The things that are being done to people. And this is where I think there is a musical group called Rage Against the Machine. The cogs in the wheel are for every citizen. I'm using that term with specificity, because every cog in the wheel to those of the oligarch Plutarch, 1.5%, are consumers. All the cogs in the wheel of the machinery of the economic machinery of capitalism, all those cogs are supposed to be consumers, to be compliant, mindless consumers. They hear an advertisement, they see an advertisement, and they reflexively reach for their wallet or their plastic to buy the product. That's what is being done to us as being lab rats, as being in the overall maze of things. They don't want citizens. They don't want people to stand up and say, hey, the emperor doesn't have any clothes. They want people to be compliant and follow along, because if there's people standing up and saying, hey, wait a second, there's something else that's going on here, that's going to cause inefficiency. That's why monopolies are so valuable. If they control everything, they don't have to worry about competition. We just had a situation with net neutrality being voted out because the person who was appointed by the POTUS, the SCROTUS and the POTUS, got a person who was an attorney previously for AT&T, and now he's the head of the FCC, and he's been instrumental in the past. Oh, gosh, it took him about 11 months, but he got net neutrality, blown out of the water. Now, there are states that are going to be suing the government because they realize how bad it is. But basically, if there was something besides net neutrality, there could be a fast lane for the people who could afford it, and there'd be the slower lane for the other people who couldn't afford it, so that things would be like dial-up as opposed to Wi-Fi. And we all know how much fun we had hearing the dial-up sound to see about getting online. But that's the idea of having us and them. Us is the ones that have the high speed, the Wi-Fi, the ultra, because we are the elite. Let the others, oh yes, let them eat cake. No, that was from the French Revolution or something like that. The point of it is, if there can be something between us and them, and oh yeah, what's the other thing that's going on right now about the tax reform? You see, Twit Romney sheltered $250 million in the Cayman Islands because he didn't want to pay tax in the United States, and it was all legal to see about having shelters over in the Cayman Islands. And there was something called the Paradise Papers that was printed over in England in the past 4 months. Didn't get much traction here in the States because it was all these people and countries and politicians having all this money stashed in these other places so they didn't have to pay taxes. So the golden rule is whoever controls the gold can make the rules, and of course that's why we have a corporatocracy, not a democracy in this country, and it's certainly influential in a lot of places as well. But all these things are going back to exploiting the way they can the population, the people that they want to be consumers, and it was tacitly put forth, and I would offer a piece of video showing Shrub after 9/11, and he's on the screen, and to his right shoulder, as we're looking at the screen, his left shoulder, there's a person in a suit, or I can't remember if it was a suit on one side and the other side was a suit or a military uniform. So one side was sort of like the military, and the other side was like the men in black, or the businessman, or the Secret Service. But there was two things with Shrub in the middle, and he was talking about what had just happened. And he said to the people, "Don't worry about the terrorists." And then he paused momentarily and then kind of with his hand said, "Just go shopping." Oh, wait a second. He just said everybody's a mindless consumer that should not worry about the military-industrial complex and about the terrorists because they were going to be taken care of by him. Oh, yeah. But to see about going out and just pretending like everything's hunky-dory. Oh, we just can go out and buy stuff. That's what he wants us to do. Oh, the world doesn't owe me a living. Or no, what's it called? Pollyanna, I think. Oh, it's everything hunky-dory. He told us just to go out there and go shopping, go to the mall. That's what is the agenda, to have people become mindless consumers. I even heard it on Earth Day about 10 years ago. They were talking about the consumers. The consumers. And this, that, and the other. No, I'm mixing it up here. It was after Thanksgiving about 10 years ago, and earlier, perhaps the same year, somewhere in the time frame, it was talking about people with Earth Day. But it was after the Thanksgiving about the great shopping opportunity on Friday after Thanksgiving. That people were there at 6 o'clock in the morning to get things, a computer for 59 cents or, $1.95, and people would elbow and trample people in order to get to it because there was a limited number. But it was the idea of buying stuff, because that's what they want us to be, is buying stuff type consumers. Speaking of the story of stuff, which was put out about 10 years ago by a third grade teacher. Can't remember her name at the moment. But the story of stuff. There's now the story of stuff, plastic bottles. And I saw it back in October as I was looking a little bit to get some bits of information that hopefully I was going to put together into a presentation for a half an hour at Laguna Beach at Star Knowledge. It was there, and I saw several things that were 4 or 5 minutes long. But the story of stuff was one of them, about plastics. Besides that stuff being dumped into the waterways, it was also talking about the gyres, Gyres. I think there's 7 of them or 6. But these are places, in fact, the one in the Pacific is called the horse latitudes. When they were sailing, all of a sudden the winds would die down and they threw the horses off because they died, and so they weren't moving and whatever. So that's the reason, I think, was the little factoid that I heard was the reason they call them the horse latitudes. But basically, stuff that goes in the North Pacific ends up, when it's floating, if it doesn't get into some stronger current, in these horse latitudes. And there's an area twice the size of the state of Texas with flotsam and jetsam of plastic materials that have been thrown off. A person who goes back and forth from California to Japan for the past 30 years noticed it about 8 or 10 or 15 years ago, sometime like that. He has seen a decrease in the aquatic life in the sky as well as in the waters. The stuff, because of its buoyancy, is 2 to 5 inches beneath the surface, so it doesn't show up on satellite maps. But that material is breaking down. It will never, of course, break down into the original, which was the oil or the dinosaurs, or however a person's going to say whatever it was that made the fluid that they extracted from the earth. But it's going to break down into microparticles or small particles, and then that looks like colorful things that the aquatic birds eat. Midway Island's about 1,000 miles north of Hawaii. The entirety of the island beaches are ringed with feathers. Feather rings ring the beach area. And those feather rings of the dead birds inside of the circle have all these pieces of plastic that they've ingested and then starved to death and died on Midway Island for lack of being able to get nutrition because of all the plastic that's been thrown away off ships, the stuff that's been, all the things that happened from the tsunami that went across the North Pacific and into Oregon and Northern California, Washington State. And we're not talking again about the Fukushima. We're just talking about the plastic. But those plastic things also apparently attract more chemicals. And so when it goes up the food chain, which it does, oh, where are we on the food chain? Oh, we're sort of at almost the apex. So all that's ingested by these feet as it goes up the food chain are ingesting these chemicals and the plastics, and then sushi, mahi. The world may end with a whimper as opposed to a bang after the 1950s, jump under the desk, duck and cover for the atomic bomb, which was the public service advice for people when we were exploding atomic weapons above the ground. There are so many things that are going on, and getting back to the basics of life as we sort of know it and kind of appreciate it is healthy air to breathe, healthiest hydration possible of mineral water, because that's the natural way, not with the convenience of having 16 to 20 ounces of drink it down, get the chemicals from the fossil fuel industry that leach into the plastic. So that means, oh, wait a second, I mean, we're drinking water that smells better and tastes better than the swimming pool, but it's got carcinogens from the oil industry? Wait a minute, the oil industry is contributing to the global warming. Wait a minute, so the oil that's being extracted and everything like that is now contaminating the water that we drink in the plastic bottles? Maybe we should have $1 return deposit on the plastic bottles so that we don't dump it into the waterways where it gets broken down by the ultraviolet rays into smaller pieces, but it never goes back into oblivion or disintegration, and as it won't go back into oil. But it's the disrespect that is being fostered by corporations and the drive for this lust of money at any cost, the earth and people be damned mentality. It's all about the bottom line, the next quarter profits for the shareholders and the board of directors. That's what has become so much of a factor, and it's getting us away from being in concert, working with the environment, with the earth, with the plants and the animals. The veganism, yeah, I mean, I've got a leather belt and I've got leather shoes. The bottom line is, you know, veganism and plant-based eating is not going to magically happen. I just saw the thing about chickens. They started putting the antibiotics into the chickens back in, I think, the 40s. And they found out somebody for some chemical company thought, let's see about just doing it as a regular habit. And they found out the ones that got some of the antibiotics were, getting bigger, heavier, fatter, quicker. Wait a minute, bigger, heavier, fatter, quicker. Well, that's what we want. We got to get them to the market. There's more profit. If we get them in the ground, or if they're still eating bugs off the ground, or if we're still feeding them, that's costing us money. If we get them bigger, heavier, fatter, quicker. Oh, wait a second. The steroids that are going into the meat supply, those steroids are to make them bigger, heavier, fatter, quicker, so that we can get them to market, so we can make it into ground beef. I wonder if that could be passed up to the food chain and maybe be a factor with the. Is there an obesity thing that's going on in the world today, especially in the United States, where approximately 2/3 of the people are overweight and some of them morbidly overweight? I wonder if it might be related back to the type of food that they ingest. It could. Well, wait a minute. Oh, yeah, Forks Over Knives is a movie, and Dr. Esselin is one of the doctors from Cleveland Heart Hospital. And it was shown that when people went to a non-carnivore diet, that their health improved. Now, that wasn't bringing in the idea of steroids and other things that are put in. Oh, yeah, the GMO corn, glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup, the toxin that they knew back in the 70s was carcinogenic, and they buried the paperwork, sealed it back in 1981. All these things have been done for the increase of profits at the expense of humanity and life as it was initially created by forces that had us evolve into what we are today. And it's many minds that have come together, but it's also many minds that have gotten into this dark area. And this dark area is, in my simplistic way, got an agenda of making people into objects to be used, exploited, and abused. The church used to do it to see about conquering lands. In fact, obviously, when Columbus came over here, he slaughtered a whole bunch of native peoples. But part of the things, humorously, Columbus said, hey, those dumb red people didn't even know they were there until we discovered them. And then there was the acting governor of the colony of Massachusetts, Governor Bradford, found out a year later that some Indians someplace had been killed. They had apparently gotten in the way of some kind of projectile firing from the Pilgrims' guns, and they'd killed about a whole bunch of them. And he sent around a proclamation giving thanks that some of these pesky pagans, these animals, had been dispatched with. And that was the beginning of the first Thanksgiving, because of a proclamation that wasn't giving thanks to the Indians for saving the Pilgrims, but giving thanks for the Pilgrims for killing some of the Indians, so there'd be more land for the colonists to have, for God, King, and the rest of my fellow countrymen. exploitation of people and the resources. That's been the predication of all expansion. And there are many people who have had minds that were capable of thinking of humanity as being valuable as opposed to just lusting after having some type of wealth. Because the bottom line is, when a person has a whole lot of zeros after their net worth, if they don't have good health, they don't have wealth of the physical, mental, spiritual sort. And give me somebody who has, as that famous song back in the 60s or 70s that I happened to hear, it said, I'm just a country boy. No money have I none, but I've got silver in the stars and gold in the morning sun. And that apparently imprinted upon me, and I can get emotional about it thinking about it now, because a stepson-like person of my heart, Patrick Howard Roy, was one of the 17 sailors that was killed on the USS Cole, October 12th of 2000. And All Wars Are Bankers' Wars documentary, YouTube, 25, 35 minutes long. That deals with the 1700s to 2005. People who have empathy, have ability to have sympathy, and people who have a connection to their fellow human beings. One mother, the earth, one peoples, one tribe, all of my relations. Words that have meaning beyond the focus and credo of places that have it not stated, but the agenda behind the curtain is greed of demon prophets, the earth, and people be damned mentality. Because it's all how much I get and get for my company, because that's what we're here to do, is game the system. Because more is better, and more is never enough for those who don't have a heart that can appreciate living creatures that want to stay alive. Patrick would have been 36 on his birthday last March 6th. Instead, he was killed when he was 19 years, 7 months, and 6 days of age. And I say it to honor his name and honor his spirit. And hopefully somebody may hear this who's a ghostwriter, because I believe there needs to be a book with 19 chapters. One at the beginning, and then 17 chapters, one for every one of the people who was killed on that ship, and one then to finish it up at the end. Because that was the war on terrorism that should have started, but amazingly, nothing really happened. There was an Able Danger program of 84 people in the military and Navy that were scattered to the four winds. And they, whoever they were, didn't want things kind of traced back. The ship should have never gone into that port. They should have been refueled out at sea. Patrick was a water sign. He loved the water. He sailed. He died on the water. But his spirit was one that appreciated animals, children, and elderly. And interestingly, the native peoples, their elders are respected. Their elders impart knowledge to their grandchildren and great grandchildren. The elders distill down that which they've gathered in their decades of collecting white hairs for their wisdom. So they put it in encapsulated form so that the youngsters will get a truth, because there's an appreciation for 7 generations. Some people say it's the present generation, 3 generations in the past, and 3 generations forward, so it'd be a total of 7. So that could be an interpretation. The gist of it is Bernie Sanders has grandchildren, and he speaks for the idea of doing things that are good for social democratic philosophy, which is what FDR did and got himself elected for 4 terms. Then he died on his last 4th term. And of course, amazingly, well, he's a socialist. No, it was a social democratic situation, and there's a big difference. But people can be misled because of the drumbeat of, oh yeah, what, 6 people control 3,900 outlets of radio, television, newspapers, magazines, because those 6 people own the corporations that dispense all this information, and they don't have an agenda? Here's a quick thing. Back in 1992, Consumer Reports had the front cover, "Time to look at life insurance." Cover showed Lloyd, the guy's silent film, hanging from a clock that was from a movie that he did, and he did his own stunts, I'm pretty sure. That was the front cover of Consumer Reports. The next 3 months, June, July, and August, had articles about the insurance industry. Senator Metzenbaum from Ohio had 3.5 hours on a Wednesday, I think in 1992, and it was about billions, maybe they said millions, but it's billions, millions of dollars being used for the wrong type of product. 3.5 hours live on Capitol Hill. That specific presentation was before they had cable news network, and they didn't have, the television cameras operating. So the Washington Post, a bastion of, the Pentagon Papers and all that stuff, all the president's men, at that time, the Washington Post didn't put it in the newspaper on Thursday, Friday, Saturday. The 4th day on Sunday, page 3 of the financial section was like a Herb Block political cartoon. It showed a man with pants and a suit coat and a tie, and he was off balance, and he had both hands askew and one leg up in the air, and then at the corner of the picture there was a hand reaching in and was pulling on the rug that this citizen was standing on, and the sleeve had a star and stripes. It looked to be like it was probably Uncle Sam's sleeve. The government was pulling the rug out from John Q. Citizen. I wonder if that's how it could have been interpreted. I wonder if that's how it was purposely created. It's the latter, folks. What was there was about what Senator Metzenbaum had, because he was the banking committee chairman. Interestingly, he didn't run for re-election. I have a feeling he might have had influence from, say, forces with the golden rule to say, wouldn't you like to see your grandchildren grow up, or your great-grandchildren maybe get into school or high school or college? So he didn't go for another election. He, at 78, decided to retire.
I hate to interrupt you. I haven't interrupted you any more than maybe once this whole interview, and probably a record there in that regard. But in regards to letting how my guests speak for the percentage, but we've only got 5 minutes left before I'm gonna have to call this show the show off because people have lousy attention spans, and having 2 hour shows is actually costing me listeners. I found that out from Andrew Bartis when I had a private session with him. He actually acknowledged that. So I'm gonna have to ask you to wrap it up here. And well, I think I don't have any questions because you basically would have answered them anyway in this 2 hour spiel where I barely said anything. So get out anything you'd like in the next 5 minutes. I'm gonna have to wrap this up, and your contact info too, by the way, if you want to get that out.
Certainly. Thank you, Andrew. Yes, the bottom line is there are things that have been put out that have been quelled. And one thing about the water as well, the Medication of America was the title of an article in a Penthouse magazine back in 1991 or 92, and I got the article and read it. I looked at the pictures too, but the article was about the Medication of America because people were getting fluoride in their water. Fluoride. And it wasn't the calcium fluoride coming naturally from the ground, it was sodium fluoride. And sodium fluoride, well, fluoride needs to be written by a prescription, but there was a rumor in a chemical journal back in 1951 that said fluoride is apparently good for teeth and bones. Well, we've got fluoride. Now it's sodium fluoride, but calcium fluoride, sodium fluoride, fluoride's fluoride. So they took the waste product from the aluminum fertilizer industry, and they had the ADA become amazingly influenced to see it was a good idea because it protected things. European countries, Scandinavian countries specifically, stopped using fluoride after 10 years, seeing no significant reduction in tooth decay. The bottom line, systemic ingestion of sodium fluoride is toxic. They used to give it, the fluoride to the prisoners at boot camp not boot camp, and the death camps in Germany. It made them passive. It also deals with the pineal gland. It causes it to become calcified, so people can't have their third eye working for them. Well, that's too esoteric. The bottom line is my vision, my idea, my overall is that I've been led and kept alive to let people know about the importance of respecting the Earth Mother and to look for things behind the scenes that are there that people can get to make themselves become inspired, educated, and make change for themselves and their loved ones. 6 million dogs a year are getting cancer, and Morris Animal Foundation didn't know about the carcinogenicity of drinking water. They had 6 bullets. 5 of them were dealing with all the research, hundreds of thousands. It's over $15 million since 1948, and the focus was on the money-making thing. The bottom line, they had prevention, and they didn't know about the June of 97 article from the Journal of NCI until I spoke with them. They're still not addressing it because they're still focused on raising money. Save, Race for the Cure, all this other stuff. Cancer was a $500 billion industry in 1997. And the hereditary thing about, it's cancerous, it will change because of chronic dehydration. So prevention is better than cure. It's just that it doesn't make as much money for the industries that are out there. So my thing is find a source, find something. I happen to find the Stradivarius of all drinking water systems, and it has certification to do so. So Mr. Stradivari made violins in the 1600s, and nothing has matched what he created 400 plus years ago. And never will, because he had some type of magic that he created and put into his instruments. So go on YouTube and look at his violin concerto with a Stradivarius violin, and a musician told me, she said, I'm a musician. I've never heard a violin sound like that, ever. This is what I know is something that's out there for people, and they don't advertise. I don't mention it because it's not the focus. The focus is respect for the earth, the hydration, the sacred water that's gifted by the Earth Mother and birthed by her with all the electrolytes. You can contact Andrew, me. I don't know what you want for identification, Andrew.
Facebook, I guess.
Well,
well,
I'm on Facebook, but just as my name.
okay.
I don't have a commercial connection to it.
Okay.
If people want to contact me, my email is HAINESIII @Yahoo, and put something like, you know, Andrew Fisher's show, or, you know, blog radio or something, so that, you know, that I'll be able to hopefully find out, because I don't do well with computers because of the unique brain. I can barely point and click, and just in the past year and a half found out how to copy and paste. But I the idea, and that's why I'm honored. Thank you, Andrew, for letting me speak, and hopefully that it can make a difference, and that you'll have positive. And I'm sorry to hear about, the people don't have the attention span.
Well, the fact that YouTube censors things isn't even any better. My recent interview with Bernie Taylor actually was listed as having 58,000 views at one point. However, that view count dropped to 22,000. So there's obviously a manipulation going on with the view count. I'm certainly not the only one. It happens to Alex Jones all the time, as well as other people in the truth movements and whatnot. So I don't know if I can even trust if I have the fewest amount of views that I have on many of my shows. I'm like, why don't I have listeners? Maybe it's not just the lousy attention spans. I'm a 2-hour shows. It might have something to do with YouTube Nazi censorship. Well, whatever the case, glad I got you on. You woke me up to a couple things I didn't know about with water, and other things that presentation you gave. And well, you certainly set a record in regards to most speaking time relative to my own speaking time on my own show. So very impressive. You can keep talking about stuff like that, and only have to take like one water break, it seemed. So didn't have to take a single water break, even though I have my water near me. So good job, man. So
thank you, Andrew.
yeah.
I thank you. I'm honored. Namaste.
Namaste. Bye bye.
Bye.